Baby found pregnant mother bear in a cage in the middle of the road. What happens next is powerful. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning had begun like any other for Lily Morgan. The young mother hummed softly as she pushed her 1-year-old daughter Emma's stroller down the quiet country road. They had recently moved to this small rural community in search of peace after years in the bustling city. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and earth, and Emma giggled as golden leaves spiraled down around them, her tiny hands reaching up to catch them. Lily had started these morning walks as a way to soothe Emma's teething troubles. Something about the gentle rocking of the stroller and fresh air always calmed her daughter, transforming her fussy cries into contented coos. Today, Emma seemed particularly alert, her wide blue eyes taking in the world with wonder as they traveled farther along the road than they ever had before. The narrow country lane wound through sparse woods, occasionally offering glimpses of distant farmhouses. Lily had just rounded a bend when her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was the call she'd been anxiously waiting for, the local preschool returning her inquiry about future enrollment. Stepping just a few feet away from the stroller but keeping it firmly in sight, Lily answered. "Yes, this is Lily Morgan," she said, her voice dropping to a professional tone as she discussed waiting lists and enrollment dates. Emma sat quietly in her stroller, unusually still as something caught her attention. In the middle of the road ahead, partially hidden by morning mist, sat an enormous rusted metal cage. The strange object seemed entirely out of place against the natural landscape. Harsh, angular, and ominous. Emma leaned forward in her stroller, her chubby hands gripping the tray as her curious eyes focused on the cage. Inside, barely visible in the shadows, was a massive brown figure. As if sensing the baby's gaze, the shape shifted slightly, and 2 sorrowful eyes emerged from the darkness. The eyes of a large female bear. The animal's fur was matted and dull, lacking the healthy sheen of a wild creature. Her movements were slow and labored, revealing a swollen belly that spoke of advanced pregnancy. The bear didn't growl or show aggression. Instead, she simply stared at Emma with an expression that seemed to transcend the divide between species. A look of exhaustion, fear, and something that resembled a silent plea. Emma, too young to understand danger, responded with innocent fascination. She dropped her teething biscuit and babbled softly, as if trying to communicate with the caged creature. Lily's voice drifted in the background as she discussed paperwork requirements, completely unaware of the extraordinary encounter unfolding just steps away. Emma, driven by an instinct beyond her years, began working at the harness of her stroller, her tiny fingers surprisingly dexterous. The plastic clip, loosened from previous adjustments, gave way with a soft click. Freed from restraint, Emma slid down from her seat with the determined awkwardness of a baby who had only recently mastered crawling. Her knees hit the dirt road as she began making her way toward the cage, leaving behind the safety of her stroller. Each movement brought her closer to the enormous caged predator, a creature that could end her life with a single swipe of its powerful paw. Yet the bear remained still, watching the approaching baby with what could only be described as gentle recognition. As Emma drew near, the morning light revealed more details of the bear's condition. Raw, bloodied marks circled her legs where ropes had cut into flesh. Her snout bore scratch marks from desperate attempts to escape, and beside the cage lay a cruel metal trap with jagged teeth, ready for its next victim. The cage itself wasn't properly locked, but merely latched, a temporary holding pen. Nearby, tire tracks in the mud suggested that whoever had captured this magnificent creature intended to return soon. The pregnant bear shifted position with obvious discomfort. Her breathing labored as she watched the approaching baby with a gaze that carried no malice. Emma reached the cage and, without hesitation, extended her small hand through the rusty bars. The distance between predator and innocent child vanished in that moment as two souls, one ancient and wild, one new and untainted, connected across an impossible divide. The bear's eyes, deep pools of amber intelligence, studied the tiny human with what could only be described as recognition. A memory, perhaps genetic, perhaps instinctual, seemed to stir within the massive creature. In another lifetime, in another world, this small being might have been prey, but something deeper than instinct guided the bear now, something that transcended the natural order. With excruciating slowness, the bear lowered her massive head. Emma's hand, so fragile compared to the bear's powerful jaws, remained outstretched. The bear's warm breath misted in the cool morning air as it gently washed over the baby's skin. Then, with tenderness that defied her wild nature, the bear extended her tongue and softly licked Emma's palm. Emma giggled, the sound pure and bright against the somber scene. Her laughter seemed to pierce something within the bear, who made a soft rumbling sound deep in her throat. Not a growl of threat, but almost a purr of comfort. A single tear, catching the morning light like a crystal, rolled from the bear's eye and disappeared into her matted fur. Lily finally concluded her call, slipping her phone back into her pocket with a satisfied smile. The preschool had a spot opening in the spring that would be perfect for Emma when she was ready. Turning back toward the stroller, Lily's world imploded in an instant. The empty harness dangled uselessly, and her daughter was nowhere in sight. "Emma!" The scream tore from Lily's throat, raw with sudden terror. Her eyes frantically scanned the road until they locked onto a sight that stopped her heart. Her baby several yards away, touching a massive wild bear through the bars of a cage. Lily's body moved before her mind could process what she was seeing. She sprinted toward her child, adrenaline flooding her system, preparing her to fight with her bare hands if necessary to save her daughter. But as she drew closer, something about the scene made her slow her desperate rush. The bear wasn't attacking. It wasn't showing any signs of aggression at all. Instead, the massive creature was lying with its head near the bars, allowing Emma to pat its snout with the same delight she showed when petting their neighbor's golden retriever. The incongruity of the scene, the gentle interaction between predator and infant, was so profound that Lily found herself approaching with caution rather than charging forward. "Emma, baby, don't move," Lily whispered, her voice trembling as she inched closer, terrified that any sudden sound might break whatever spell had kept her daughter safe thus far. As Lily drew near, she could now see the bear clearly. The creature's condition was far worse than she had initially realized. Beyond the obvious signs of mistreatment, Lily could see that the bear's swollen belly was not just that of a well-fed animal. The distinctive shape, and the way the skin rippled with movement beneath the fur, told the story clearly. This was a mother bear, heavily pregnant, and likely very close to giving birth. Lily's own maternal instincts sparked in recognition. The bear's eyes met hers, and in that moment something passed between the two mothers, one human, one animal, a silent understanding that transcended species. The bear made no move to harm Emma, even as Lily carefully approached and knelt beside her daughter. "It's okay, sweetie," Lily murmured, gently placing her hand on Emma's back while keeping her eyes fixed on the bear. "The mama bear is scared. We need to be gentle." Emma babbled excitedly, pointing at the bear's swollen belly where movement was visible, tiny paws or snouts pushing against the stretched fur from within. "Ba-ba," Emma said, one of her few words, usually reserved for her own bottles. The bear shifted position with obvious discomfort, and Lily noticed dark staining on the metal floor of the cage beneath the animal. With a shock of recognition, Lily realized what was happening. The bear wasn't just pregnant, she was in labor. "Oh my God," Lily breathed, her hand instinctively moving to her phone. Who does one call when finding a pregnant bear in a cage on a country road? The local authorities seemed like the only option. But would they understand the urgency? Would they arrive in time? And more importantly, would they save the bear or simply eliminate what they might perceive as a threat? Before Lily could decide on a course of action, the sound of an approaching engine broke the stillness of the morning. A heavy, rumbling sound that grew louder with each passing second. Around the bend in the road appeared the distinctive profile of a pickup truck, mud splattered and dented, moving at a deliberate pace. The bear's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She retreated to the back of the cage, her body trembling visibly, eyes wide with renewed terror. The truck slowed as it approached the cage, finally stopping about 20 feet away. The engine cut off, and the driver's door swung open with a protesting creak. A tall man in camouflage clothing and a heavy beard stepped out, his movements unhurried but purposeful. He hadn't noticed Lily and Emma yet, his attention focused on the cage and its occupant. "Well, well, looks like our mama bear is getting ready to give us some cubs," the man called out, his voice carrying a note of cruel satisfaction that made Lily's skin crawl. "Them cubs'll fetch a pretty penny on the exotic pet market once they're weaned." A second figure emerged from the passenger side. Younger, slimmer, with a hesitant demeanor that suggested reluctance rather than enthusiasm. "Dad, I still don't think this is right," the young man said. His voice barely audible from where Lily crouched. "That bear belongs in the wild, and taking cubs is illegal." "Shut up, Jacob," the older man snapped. "You've been whining since we trapped her. This is good money, clean money, and no one's going to miss one bear and her cubs." It was then that the older man spotted Lily and Emma by the cage. His expression darkened instantly, hand moving toward his waistband where the outline of what might be a gun was visible beneath his jacket. "What the hell?" he growled, taking a step forward. "Get away from my property." Lily stood slowly, positioning herself between Emma and the approaching man. Her heart hammered in her chest, but a fierce protective instinct overrode her fear. She picked up Emma, who protested with a whine, reaching back toward the bear. "This bear needs medical attention," Lily said, striving to keep her voice steady. "She's in labor. I've already called wildlife services." The lie came easily, born of necessity. The older man's face contorted with anger. "This ain't your business, lady. Take your kid and get off my land." "This is a public road," Lily countered, backing away but not turning her back on the man. "And what you're doing is poaching. It's illegal." The younger man, Jacob, had moved closer to the cage, and his expression changed as he observed the bear's condition. "Dad, she's bleeding. I think she's having the cubs now. We should let her go." "We're not letting a payday walk into the woods," his father snarled. But a new sound cut through the tension, the distant but approaching wail of sirens. Lily hadn't actually called anyone yet, but someone else apparently had. Relief flooded through her as the older poacher's face paled. "Jacob, get the truck started," he ordered, panic edging his voice. "Now!" But Jacob didn't move. Instead, he stepped toward the cage and reached for the latch. "No, Dad, I'm done with this. This isn't who I want to be." "You ungrateful little—" The father lunged toward Jacob, but the younger man was quicker, flipping the latch open before his father could reach him. The cage door swung open with a metallic groan. For one breathless moment, everyone froze. Lily clutching Emma, the two men caught in their struggle, and the bear, suddenly faced with an open door. The ancient animal rose to her full height, towering and magnificent despite her condition. Her eyes swept over the humans, lingering last on Emma, who was still reaching toward her with tiny, grasping hands. The mother bear stepped forward, out of the cage that had held her captive, her movements slow and deliberate, her pregnant belly swaying with each careful step. The older poacher stumbled backward, reaching again for what was surely a weapon. Jacob saw the movement and tackled his father to the ground, both men falling in a tangle of limbs and curses. "No!" Jacob shouted, wrestling with his father for control of the gun that had now emerged from the older man's jacket. "No more. This ends now." Lily expected the bear to flee into the woods or perhaps attack her tormentors. Instead, the massive creature padded directly toward her and Emma. Lily's instinct screamed at her to run, but something deeper held her in place. The bear approached until she was mere feet away, close enough that Lily could feel the heat radiating from her massive body, could smell the wild musk of her fur. Emma babbled happily, completely unafraid as the bear lowered her head to the baby's level. For one impossible moment, bear and baby gazed at each other, a silent communion that Lily couldn't begin to comprehend. The bear made a soft chuffing sound, almost like a farewell. Then something alarming happened. The bear swayed on her feet, her massive body trembling. A low moan escaped her throat, a sound of pain rather than aggression. Dark fluid trickled down her hind legs, pooling on the dirt road beneath her. The bear was going into active labor, her body contracting visibly under her fur. "She can't travel like this," Lily whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "She'll lose her cubs." The sirens grew louder as a Forest Service truck rounded the bend, followed closely by a police cruiser. The vehicles skidded to a halt, and uniformed officers poured out, weapons drawn at the sight of the free bear so close to humans. "Step away from the bear, ma'am," shouted one officer, his rifle trained on the laboring animal. "No, wait!" Lily cried out, instinctively shielding the bear with her body while still holding Emma. "She's in labor. She needs help, not bullets." From the Forest Service truck emerged a woman in a khaki uniform, her movements quick but controlled. "Hold your fire," she commanded with authority. "That's a pregnant bear in distress." The woman approached cautiously, assessing the situation with experienced eyes. "I'm Dr. Savannah Reed, wildlife veterinarian," she said to Lily. "You're incredibly brave, but I need you to back away slowly now." The standoff between Jacob and his father had been subdued by the police officers, who now had both men in handcuffs near their truck. The older man spat curses, while Jacob hung his head, occasionally glancing at the bear with obvious concern. Dr. Reed called to her colleagues, who began unloading equipment from their truck. "We need to tranquilize her and get her to the sanctuary," she explained to Lily. "She's too far into labor to move far, but we can't let her deliver here on the road." "Will she be okay?" Lily asked, reluctantly backing away with Emma, who was still reaching toward the bear, crying now, as if she understood the animal's distress. "I'll do everything I can, Doctor," Reed promised, filling a tranquilizer gun with practiced efficiency. "She's suffered a lot at human hands. It's about time some humans helped her." The bear had lowered herself to the ground, her massive body heaving with contractions. Her eyes found Emma once more, and the connection between them seemed to transcend the chaos around them. Even as Dr. Reed carefully approached with the tranquilizer gun, the bear's gaze remained fixed on the baby who had somehow recognized her plight. The dart found its mark with a soft thump, and the bear barely reacted, already too consumed by the labor process to register the small additional pain. Within minutes, her massive body relaxed as the sedative took effect, her breathing steadying into a rhythmic pattern. "She's stable for now," Dr. Reed announced, kneeling beside the unconscious animal and checking her vital signs. "But we need to move quickly. These cubs are coming soon, with or without our help." A specially equipped trailer was backed up as close as possible to the bear. Under Dr. Reed's direction, a team of wildlife officers carefully transferred the sedated animal onto a reinforced tarp that served as a makeshift stretcher. The bear's enormous weight required 6 people to lift her into the trailer. Lily stood by the roadside, holding Emma, who had finally quieted, watching the rescue operation with a mixture of hope and anxiety. One of the police officers approached her, notebook in hand. "Ma'am, I need to take your statement about what happened here," he said, kindly but firmly. "You've witnessed a wildlife crime in progress." Lily nodded, her eyes still on the trailer where the bear was being prepared for transport. "Of course," she replied. "But first, please tell me where they're taking her. I need to know she'll be all right." The officer's professional demeanor softened slightly. "They're taking her to the Blue Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary, about 30 miles from here. It's the best facility in the state for wildlife rehabilitation." As Lily provided her account of the morning's events, the poachers were loaded into separate police vehicles. Jacob, the younger man, looked back at Lily as he was placed in the cruiser. "Thank you," he called out unexpectedly, "for stopping us, for saving her." His father glared from the other police car but remained silent, his plans for profit from the bear cubs thoroughly destroyed. Dr. Reed approached Lily as the statement-taking concluded. "Your daughter has a rare gift," she said, nodding toward Emma, who was now sleepily resting her head on Lily's shoulder. "Animals sense things in children that they don't in adults, the innocence, perhaps, or the lack of judgment." "Will the bear survive?" Lily asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since the drama began. Dr. Reed's face grew serious. "She's in rough shape, dehydrated, malnourished, and now in premature labor due to stress. But she's strong. I've seen wildlife overcome worse with proper care." She handed Lily a business card. "Call this number tomorrow. I'll make sure they update you on her condition." As the various vehicles departed, the police with their suspects, the wildlife team with their precious cargo, Lily found herself alone on the road with Emma, the empty cage standing as mute testimony to the morning's extraordinary events. She stared at the rusty metal structure, now holding nothing but shadows and the lingering scent of wild fur. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured to Emma, turning back toward their abandoned stroller. "We have a story to tell when we get home, a story no one will believe." Emma's tiny hand patted Lily's cheek, leaving behind a faint smudge of dirt and, perhaps, a trace of bear saliva from when she had touched the wild creature's tongue. In that moment, Lily felt the weight of the experience settle into her bones, the terror, the wonder, the connection between species that had unfolded before her eyes. The following days passed in a blur of police statements, local news interviews, which Lily declined, and anxious waiting. True to her word, Dr. Reed ensured that Lily received regular updates on the bear's condition. The news came on the 3rd day. The mother bear had delivered 3 healthy cubs despite her ordeal. The smallest was struggling, but holding on with the tenacity of wild things fighting to survive in a world increasingly hostile to their existence. 2 weeks after the roadside encounter, Lily received a call from Dr. Reed herself. "We've got someone here who might want to meet your daughter properly," the veterinarian said, her voice warm with something that sounded like amazement. That is, if you're willing to bring Emma to the sanctuary. Lily didn't hesitate. When? The Blue Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary sprawled across 50 acres of protected forest land. Its facilities designed to rehabilitate injured wildlife with minimal human contact. Dr. Reed met them at the entrance, her khaki uniform replaced by medical scrubs bearing the sanctuary's logo. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Reed explained as she led them along a gravel path toward a secluded section of the facility. "The mother bear, we've named her Serenity, has been reluctant to let any humans near her cubs. Standard procedure for rewilding. But she's been restless, constantly looking toward the entrance whenever anyone approaches, almost as if she's waiting for someone." They reached a specialized observation area with one-way glass looking into a large, naturalistic enclosure. Inside, lying on a bed of straw beneath a wooden shelter, was the mother bear. Her coat had been cleaned, her wounds treated, and her body, though still recovering from birth, looked substantially healthier than when Lily had last seen her on the road. Nestled against her massive form were 3 tiny bundles of fur, the cubs, each no larger than a house cat, nursing contentedly. "She can't see us, but she can smell us," Dr. Reed explained quietly. "Watch." As if on cue, the bear's head lifted. Her nostrils flared as she sampled the air. Something changed in her posture. A tensing, an alertness that hadn't been there before. Slowly, she rose to her feet, causing her cubs to squeak in protest at the interruption of their meal. The bear padded directly to the glass, stopping just inches away, her breath fogging the transparent barrier. Emma, who had been quiet in Lily's arms, suddenly became animated. She squirmed and reached toward the glass, babbling excitedly. "Ba-ba!" she exclaimed, the same sound she had made on the road. "Incredible," Dr. Reed whispered. "She recognizes your daughter's scent, even through the glass, even among all the other human scents here. This is unprecedented." The bear placed one massive paw against the glass, directly opposite where Emma's tiny hand pressed from the other side. Though separated by barriers both physical and species, the connection that had formed on that country road remained unbroken. "We've named the smallest cub Emma," Dr. Reed said softly. It seemed fitting somehow. Tears filled Lily's eyes as she watched the silent communion between her daughter and the wild mother who had found compassion in the most unlikely of places, the innocent gaze of a human child. "When they're strong enough, we'll release them back into the protected wilderness," Dr. Reed continued. "Serenity has taught us something profound about cross-species empathy. We're documenting everything for research." "And the poachers?" Lily asked, not taking her eyes off the bear and her cubs. "The father is facing multiple federal wildlife trafficking charges. He won't be trapping animals for a very long time." Dr. Reed's expression softened. "The son, Jacob, made a plea deal. He's going to work with our anti-poaching education program. Sometimes people can change when confronted with the consequences of their actions." They stayed for an hour, watching the bear family in their temporary sanctuary. Eventually, Serenity returned to her cubs, but not before casting one last look at the glass where Emma's scent lingered. A look that seemed to carry understanding beyond words, beyond the boundaries that supposedly separated the human world from the wild. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Reed handed Lily an envelope. "We've established a fund in Emma's name for wildlife protection. There's something about this story that touches people deeply. The innocence of a child recognizing the sacred nature of motherhood across species. It's already generating substantial donations." Lily accepted the envelope, touched beyond words. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion, "for saving her. For letting us be part of this." Dr. Reed smiled. Sometimes the most powerful connections come from the most unexpected encounters. Emma reminded Serenity of what kindness feels like. In a world increasingly disconnected from nature, that might be the most important lesson of all. As they drove home, Emma fell asleep in her car seat, her tiny face peaceful in repose. Lily glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, wondering what memories, if any, would remain of this extraordinary experience as Emma grew. Perhaps none on a conscious level, but Lily believed that somewhere deep in her daughter's developing mind, the connection with Serenity would endure. A reminder of the thin veil that separates humans from the wild, and how easily that veil can be lifted by innocence and compassion. 3 years later, a package arrived at their home. Inside was a framed photograph of a mother bear with 3 adolescent cubs captured by a wildlife camera in the protected forest. A note from Dr. Reed accompanied the image. Serenity and family, thriving in the wild. Little Emma is the one closest to her mother. Some bonds, it seems, never break. Lily showed the photograph to her daughter, now a curious and verbal 4-year-old. "Do you remember the bear, sweetheart?" she asked, though she expected no recognition. Emma studied the photograph with unusual intensity for a child her age. She reached out, touching the image of the smallest cub with a gentle finger. She was sad, Emma said simply. But not anymore. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. "How do you know that, honey?" Emma shrugged, the matter seemingly obvious to her young mind. "Because she's free now, like she wanted to be." That night, after tucking Emma into bed, Lily stood by the window, looking out at the forest that bordered their property. Somewhere out there, perhaps miles away, perhaps closer than she imagined, Serenity and her cubs were going about their wild lives, hunting, playing, sleeping beneath the stars. 2 mothers, 2 families, forever connected by a moment of unexpected grace on a country road. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in nature isn't tooth or claw, but the simple recognition of another soul's need, even when that recognition comes from the most vulnerable among us. 5 years passed. Emma grew from a toddler into a bright-eyed 9-year-old with an uncanny affinity for animals. Unlike other children who merely loved pets, Emma possessed something deeper, a quiet stillness that drew wild creatures to her, rather than sending them fleeing. Birds would land near her while she read in the backyard. Deer would continue grazing when she approached in the woods. It was as if the wild world recognized something in her, some ancient understanding that transcended the usual wariness animals showed toward humans. Lily had never forgotten their encounter with Serenity. The framed photograph of the bear family hung in their living room, a daily reminder of that extraordinary morning that had changed their lives in subtle but profound ways. Following the incident, Lily had redirected her career, leaving her corporate job to work with the local conservation authority. The skills she had once used to increase company profits were now employed to protect wild spaces and the creatures that inhabited them. On Emma's 9th birthday, Dr. Reed called with unexpected news. "We've been tracking Serenity's family through non-invasive methods, remote cameras, DNA from fur samples, that sort of thing," the veterinarian explained, her voice tinged with excitement. "They've been thriving in the deep forest, mostly keeping away from human-populated areas." "That's wonderful," Lily replied, watching through the window as Emma played in the yard, seemingly having an animated conversation with a squirrel that had approached unusually close. "I'm glad they're doing well." "Well, that's actually why I'm calling, Doctor," Reed continued. "Something unusual has happened. Our wildlife corridors extend all the way to the national forest that borders your property. According to our tracking data, Serenity and her cubs, well, they're fully grown bears now, have been moving steadily toward your area for the past month. Lily felt her breath catch. Toward us? It can't be coincidence, can it? In my professional opinion, no. Dr. Reed's voice grew serious. Bears have complex spatial memories and extraordinary senses. Serenity would remember Emma's scent, and bears can detect specific scents over remarkable distances under the right conditions. Is it dangerous? Lily asked, though something in her gut told her that danger wasn't what was approaching. Ordinarily, I'd say yes. Wild bears near human habitation is always concerning. But this is Serenity we're talking about. Dr. Reed paused. I've alerted the local rangers to monitor but not interfere unless absolutely necessary. I thought you should know they're in the vicinity. After hanging up, Lily debated whether to tell Emma. The girl had grown up with the story of the bear cub named after her. But Lily had always been careful to emphasize that wild animals should be respected from a distance, despite their special experience. Would knowing that Serenity was potentially nearby encourage Emma to venture too deep into the woods alone? That evening, as they sat on the porch watching twilight settle over the forest, Emma suddenly looked up from her book. Mom, do you think animals remember people the way people remember animals? The question caught Lily off guard with its timing. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? Emma shrugged, her eyes drifting toward the tree line. I had a dream last night. About the bear, Serenity. She was looking for something. I think maybe she was looking for me. A chill ran down Lily's spine that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Dreams are funny that way, she said carefully. They mix things we know with things we imagine. Emma nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. I think she's close, she said simply, then returned to her book as if she'd commented on nothing more significant than the weather. That night, an unexpected storm rolled through the valley, bringing torrential rain and fierce winds that howled around the corners of their house. Lily was awakened at midnight by the sound of a tree crashing down somewhere in the distance. She checked on Emma, finding her daughter sleeping peacefully despite the tempest outside, then went downstairs to make sure all the windows were secure. As she passed through the living room, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard outside the large picture window. For a split second, Lily thought she saw a massive shadow at the edge of the property, something large and distinctly bear-shaped, but the darkness reclaimed the scene before she could be certain. Heart racing, she peered into the darkness, but could see nothing more as the rain pounded against the glass. Morning revealed the storm's damage. Branches strewn across the yard, the power out, and most alarmingly, the massive oak that had stood at the property line for a century now lay fallen, bridging the small ravine that separated their yard from the deeper forest beyond. The great tree had created an unintentional pathway directly from the wild woods to their backyard. As Lily surveyed the damage, her phone rang. It was Tyler Bennett, one of the local forest rangers who had been monitoring the area since Dr. Reed's alert about Serenity's approach. Just checking in after that storm, he said, his tone professional but concerned. Wanted to let you know we've had reports of bear activity much closer to residential areas last night. The storm likely disrupted their normal patterns. I thought I saw something in our yard during the night, Lily admitted. And now there's a fallen tree creating basically a bridge from the forest right to our house. I'll come by and check it out, Tyler offered. In the meantime, keep Emma close to the house today if you can. But when Lily turned to tell Emma to stay inside, she discovered her daughter was no longer on the porch where she'd been eating breakfast. Panic immediately flooded her system. Emma, she called, rushing back into the house to search room by room. The girl wasn't inside. Racing back out to the yard, Lily's worst fears were confirmed. Small footprints in the mud led directly to the fallen oak tree, crossing over it into the forest beyond. Lily ran back inside, grabbed her phone and a flashlight, then hurried to follow her daughter's trail. The ranger was already on his way. She'd meet him on the trail if possible. As she reached the fallen oak, she noticed something unusual about Emma's footprints. They weren't alone. Alongside them, partially obscured by the scattered leaves and broken branches, were much larger prints, the unmistakable paw marks of an adult bear. "Emma!" Lily screamed, terror giving her voice a raw edge as she scrambled across the tree trunk. The forest beyond was thick with underbrush, still dripping from the night's downpour. The trail was easy to follow, however. Broken twigs and disturbed ground showed where both her daughter and the bear had passed. Lily had never moved so fast in her life, branches whipping her face as she plunged deeper into the woods. The trail led uphill, toward a rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley. As she climbed, calling Emma's name repeatedly, she heard Tyler's voice in the distance, also shouting for the girl. When Lily finally burst into a small clearing near the top of the rise, the sight that greeted her made her freeze in her tracks. Emma sat on a large, flat boulder in the center of the clearing, and surrounding the boulder, like guardians from some primeval myth, were 4 bears. Serenity was instantly recognizable despite the years that had passed. Larger now, her coat thick and glossy with health, but with the same intelligent eyes that had connected with Emma's on that country road. Beside her were 3 younger bears, no longer cubs, but not quite as massive as their mother. Serenity's children, now grown into adolescence. And Emma, showing not a hint of fear, was speaking to them as if continuing a conversation that had been interrupted years ago. "And I knew you'd come back someday," Lily heard her daughter saying as she approached slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I've been dreaming about you for so long." "Emma," Lily called softly, her voice shaking. "Honey, don't move." Emma turned, her face illuminated with a joy so pure it was almost otherworldly. "Mom, they came to find us, just like in my dreams." The bears turned their attention to Lily, and she fought every instinct that screamed at her to run. Serenity's gaze was particularly intense, seeming to evaluate Lily with an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. After a moment that felt eternal, the great bear made a soft huffing sound and returned her attention to Emma. "They're saying goodbye," Emma said with absolute certainty. "The storm knocked down their den. They have to travel north to find a new home, but Serenity wanted to see me first." Lily wanted to ask how Emma could possibly know this, but before she could speak, Tyler Bennett emerged from the trees behind her, rifle in hand. When he saw the gathering of bears, he immediately raised his weapon. "No!" both Lily and Emma cried out simultaneously. Tyler froze, his experienced eyes taking in the scene. The calm bears, the unafraid child, the absence of any aggressive posturing from the powerful predators. "What in God's name?" he muttered. "Please," Lily pleaded quietly. "Don't shoot. They're not threatening us." As if understanding the danger, Serenity made a low vocalization. The 3 younger bears immediately backed away from the boulder, moving toward the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Only Serenity remained, her eyes still fixed on Emma. "They need safe passage through the valley," Emma said, sliding down from the boulder. "Their home was destroyed, and people are building new houses in their territory. They need help." Tyler lowered his rifle slowly, his ranger training at war with the inexplicable scene before him. "How do you know what they need?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma shrugged. "I just know, the same way I knew they were coming." She turned to her mother. "Mom, you work for the conservation people. Can't you help them?" In that moment, facing her daughter's absolute conviction and the steady gaze of a bear that had once shown mercy when none should have been expected, Lily felt something shift within her. The impossible connection between Emma and these wild creatures was beyond scientific explanation, but its reality was undeniable. "Yes," she said firmly, "we can help them." Tyler looked between Lily, Emma, and the bears, clearly struggling to reconcile what he was witnessing with his training and experience. "The northern corridor is still undeveloped," he said finally. "If they're trying to establish a new territory, that's where they should go. The problem is getting them there safely. It's nearly 20 miles, and they'd have to skirt too close to the new development." "We'll find a way," Lily said, stepping closer to Emma and placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "We have to." Serenity made another low sound, then turned and padded toward where her children waited at the edge of the clearing. At the tree line, she paused and looked back once more at Emma, who raised her hand in a simple gesture of farewell. "Goodbye," Emma called softly. "We'll make sure you get home safe." The magnificent creature held the child's gaze for one more moment, then disappeared into the shadows of the forest, her family following behind her. The silence that descended upon the clearing felt charged with meaning. Tyler finally lowered his rifle completely, his expression a mixture of awe and confusion. "In 15 years as a ranger, I've never seen anything like that," he said. "Bears don't behave that way with humans. Ever." "These bears do," Emma replied simply. "With me." That afternoon, an emergency meeting was convened at the local Conservation Authority office. Dr. Reed drove up from the sanctuary, joining Lily, Tyler, and the regional wildlife manager, Michael Hayes. Emma had been reluctantly left at home with a trusted neighbor, despite her protests that she should be included in planning Serenity's safe passage. Dr. Reed reviewed the tracking data that showed Serenity's family's movements over the past years. "They've been model bears, if such a thing exists," she explained, pointing to the map. "Staying deep in protected areas, avoiding human contact, raising healthy offspring, until 3 weeks ago, when they began this deliberate movement toward your property." Michael Hayes frowned at the map. "And now their den site has been destroyed in the storm, right when the Thompson Creek development is breaking ground on the western side of their territory. Bad timing all around." "The northern wilderness corridor is their best option," Tyler said, tracing the route with his finger. "But they'd have to cross the state highway and skirt past the construction site. Too many opportunities for human-bear conflict." "Not if the bears were moved deliberately," Dr. Reed suggested, "a controlled relocation. Tranquilizing and relocating 4 adult bears is a massive undertaking," Michael objected, "and stress from that kind of handling could cause them to abandon the new territory immediately, putting them right back in harm's way." Lily had been quiet, thinking about Emma's inexplicable bond with these animals. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if they would follow guidance without needing to be tranquilized?" 3 pairs of skeptical eyes turned toward her. "You're suggesting they'd follow what? A vehicle? A trail of food?" Michael asked doubtfully. "Not what, who?" Lily took a deep breath. "My daughter, Emma." The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Reed was the first to speak. "Under normal circumstances, I'd say that's completely out of the question. But I witnessed the initial interaction between Emma and Serenity years ago. And bears do have extraordinary memory, especially for scents associated with positive experiences. You're actually considering using a child to lead 4 wild bears through 20 miles of forest." Michael's tone made his opinion of this idea clear. That's insane and dangerous. More dangerous than tranquilizing a mother bear who's already lost one home and might abandon a new territory if she's traumatized again, Lily countered. More dangerous than having them wander into the construction site or across the highway on their own. Tyler cleared his throat. I saw how those bears were with Emma this morning. I can't explain it, but they were gentle, respectful, even. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it. The discussion continued for hours, plans proposed and discarded. The ethical and practical considerations weighed against the urgent need to help Serenity's family establish a new territory safely away from human development. In the end, a compromise was reached, one that recognized both the extraordinary connection between Emma and the bears and the legitimate safety concerns of using a child in a wildlife relocation. 3 days later, as dawn broke over the valley, an unusual procession assembled at the edge of Lily and Emma's property. Emma, equipped with a state-of-the-art radio tracking device and surrounded by wildlife experts, including Dr. Reed and Tyler, would help guide Serenity's family along a carefully plotted route through the forest. At strategic points, vehicles and additional personnel would be stationed to ensure both human and bear safety, particularly at the highway crossing, which would be temporarily closed to traffic. Remember the rules, Lily told Emma seriously as they prepared to begin. You stay within sight of Tyler or Doctor. Reed at all times. If they tell you to get in the vehicle, you do it immediately, no questions asked. Emma nodded solemnly, her expression showing both excitement and a surprising maturity. I understand, Mom, but Serenity won't hurt me. She came to find me to ask for help. Lily embraced her daughter tightly. I believe you, sweetheart. But this is still a wild animal with her family to protect. We have to be respectful of that. The operation began with uncertainty. Would the bears even appear when called? Emma had insisted they would, with a confidence that the adults found both unsettling and compelling. She walked to the fallen oak tree that still bridged the ravine and stood quietly, looking into the forest beyond. Then she sang, a simple childish melody that she had made up herself, her clear voice carrying through the morning mist. The assembled team of wildlife experts and rangers watched in tense silence, hands near tranquilizer guns and radios. 5 minutes passed. 10. Dr. Reed exchanged concerned glances with Tyler. Perhaps this unprecedented plan had been folly after all. Then the underbrush rustled. From the shadows emerged Serenity, her massive form moving with surprising grace despite her size. Behind her, slightly more hesitant, came her 3 grown cubs. The bears stopped at the edge of the clearing, alert but calm, their eyes fixed on Emma. They're here, Emma said unnecessarily, her face breaking into a smile of pure joy. I told you they'd come. What followed was a day unlike any other in the annals of wildlife management. A young girl walking through the forest, followed at a respectful distance by 4 wild bears, with a team of astonished experts monitoring every step. Emma would stop occasionally, wait for the bears to catch up, sing her little song again, and continue onward along the flagged route. At the highway crossing, the bears initially balked, sensing the unfamiliar sense of asphalt and vehicle exhaust. Emma sat down on the grass verge and waited patiently. After nearly an hour, during which traffic was diverted and onlookers kept at bay, Serenity cautiously approached the child, sniffed the air deeply, then led her family quickly across the empty road. By late afternoon, they had reached the northern corridor, pristine wilderness that stretched for miles, far from the encroaching development. A perfect new home for a bear family needing to start fresh. At the edge of a crystal-clear stream, Emma stopped. This is it, she announced with certainty. This is where they want to stay. Dr. Reed consulted her maps and nodded in agreement. Excellent water source. Abundant berry patches visible on the hillside. Good tree cover for shelter. It's prime bear habitat. Emma turned to face Serenity, who had settled on her haunches a few yards away, watching the child with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond animal understanding. The three younger bears were already exploring their new territory, investigating scents and sounds with curious noses and ears. "It's time to say goodbye for real," Emma said, her voice suddenly small with the weight of the moment. She approached Serenity slowly, stopping within a few feet of the enormous predator. The assembled rangers and wildlife experts held their breath, hands poised near their tranquilizer guns. Lily felt her heart hammering in her chest, but forced herself to remain still, trusting in the inexplicable bond that had brought them all to this moment. Serenity lowered her great head until she was eye level with the child. Emma reached out one small hand and held it palm forward, not quite touching the bear but close enough that their breaths mingled in the cool forest air. "Thank you for trusting me," Emma whispered. "Like I trusted you." Serenity made a soft, chuffing sound, her breath warm against Emma's skin. Then, in a gesture that would be discussed in wildlife biology circles for years to come, the bear gently pressed her nose against the child's palm for the briefest of moments before pulling back. "Goodbye," Emma said, tears now streaming down her face. "Be happy in your new home." As if understanding that the time for parting had come, Serenity turned away from the humans and lumbered toward her exploring cubs. The bear family moved deeper into the forest, occasionally visible through the trees, until they disappeared into their new wilderness home. The story of Emma and Serenity spread far beyond the small community, of course. Despite efforts to keep the unusual relocation operation private, local news picked it up, then national outlets, then international media. Experts debated the scientific implications of cross-species communication. Others dismissed it as a fluke or exaggeration, while some saw in it a spiritual message about humanity's relationship with the natural world. For Lily and Emma, however, the experience remained deeply personal. Emma's affinity for animals only grew stronger as she matured, eventually leading her to study wildlife biology under Dr. Reed's mentorship. The Blue Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary established the Serenity Project, a groundbreaking research initiative focused on non-invasive methods of human-wildlife conflict resolution. Throughout the years, the wildlife cameras placed in the northern corridor would occasionally capture images of Serenity and her family, thriving in their new territory. And sometimes, when the wind was right and the forest quieted to a hush, Emma, even as she grew into adulthood, could swear she heard a distant huffing sound, like a bear's greeting carried on the breeze. Their extraordinary connection had changed not just two lives, but an entire community's relationship with the wild creatures that shared their valley. It served as a powerful reminder that sometimes understanding comes not from scientific data or careful planning, but from the simple, unexpected bond between two mothers and a child who saw beyond fear to the heart beneath the fur. Years later, when Emma had children of her own, she would take them to the edge of the northern wilderness and tell them the story of Serenity. And sometimes, if they were very quiet and very patient, they might glimpse a bear watching them from the shadows, not with aggression or fear, but with the calm recognition of old friends meeting across the boundaries that only humans believed could not be crossed. 20 years after the remarkable bear relocation, Emma Morgan Harrison stood on the porch of her research cabin, watching the sun sink behind the mountains that had become her home. At 32, she had established herself as one of the world's foremost experts on ursine behavior. Her groundbreaking research on bear communication and cognition challenging long-held beliefs about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. The cabin, situated at the edge of what was now officially designated as the Serenity Wildlife Preserve, served as both her home and research station. Following her graduation from veterinary school with a specialization in wildlife medicine, Emma had returned to the valley where her extraordinary childhood experience had shaped her destiny. Inside the cabin, her 5-year-old twins, Lily and Jacob, named for her mother and the young poacher whose change of heart had played a crucial role in Serenity's story, were helping their father, Connor Harrison, prepare dinner. Connor, a wildlife photographer who had first met Emma during a documentary about the Serenity Project, shared her passion for conservation and understanding the delicate balance between human development and wildlife preservation. Emma's phone chirped with an incoming message. It was from her mother, Lily, who at 57 had become the regional director of conservation for the entire Eastern Mountain Range. The text contained only 2 words and a photo attachment. "They're back." Emma's heart quickened as she opened the attachment. The image, captured by one of the hundreds of wildlife cameras scattered throughout the preserve, showed a massive female bear with distinctive markings around her muzzle. Markings that Emma would recognize anywhere. Serenity, now in her elder years for a wild bear, was still alive and thriving in the northern corridor they had helped her family reach 2 decades earlier. But it wasn't just Serenity's appearance that made the photo remarkable. Beside her was a younger female bear, clearly one of her offspring. And around that younger bear were 3 tiny cubs, tumbling playfully in the dappled forest light. Serenity had become a grandmother, her legacy continuing into a new generation that had never known the trauma of captivity or the threat of poaching. Emma saved the photo, emotion tightening her throat. The Serenity Project had tracked the original bear family for years, before gradually reducing their monitoring to respect the animal's wild nature. This was the first confirmed sighting of Serenity herself in nearly 5 years. Some had feared the aging bear had finally passed away, as the average lifespan of wild bears rarely exceeded 25 years. "Mom, Dad says dinner's ready," called Jacob from the doorway, his wild red hair, inherited from Connor, sticking up in all directions. "Coming, sweetheart," Emma replied, tucking her phone away and following her son inside. Over dinner, Emma shared the news of Serenity's return with her family, explaining to the twins once again the remarkable story of her childhood encounter with the bear. "Can we see her?" asked Lily, her dark eyes, so like her grandmother's, wide with excitement. "Can we go find Grandma Bear?" The nickname had stuck after Emma had first told the children about Serenity, and despite her efforts to explain that wild animals were not pets or extended family members, her scientifically trained mind couldn't quite bring herself to completely dismiss the sentiment behind it. After all, wasn't her entire career built upon recognizing the complex emotional lives of creatures that science had long dismissed as operating purely on instinct? "We don't find bears, honey," Connor explained gently. "We respect their space and let them live their wild lives. That's how we show them love." Emma smiled at her husband gratefully. Connor understood better than most the delicate balance she maintained between her scientific training and the inexplicable bond she had formed with Serenity all those years ago. A bond that conventional wildlife biology could not entirely explain. After the children were tucked into bed, Emma and Connor sat on the porch with steaming mugs of tea, watching the moonlight silvering the forest. "You're thinking about going to look for her, aren't you?" Connor asked quietly. Emma sighed. Her husband knew her too well. "I keep telling myself it would be irresponsible, that I'd be projecting human emotions onto a wild animal, that the connection I felt as a child was probably augmented by imagination and the mysterious perspective of childhood." "But," Connor prompted, but every instinct I have tells me she came back for a reason. Emma turned to face him. The camera that captured this image is miles from her established territory. She brought her daughter and grandcubs to the southern edge of the preserve, closest to human habitation, closest to where she knows I would be. Connor considered this. Unlike many who dismissed his wife's special relationship with Serenity as a charming but exaggerated story, he had witnessed enough moments of unexplainable connection between Emma and the wild creatures she studied to maintain an open mind. "What does your mother think?" he asked finally. "Mom thinks something's wrong," Emma replied, staring into the darkness. "She's been monitoring the development projects around the preserve boundaries. The Reynolds Corporation has been pushing hard to reduce the buffer zone on the western edge to expand their resort complex." "The same edge where Serenity was photographed," Connor noted. Emma nodded grimly. "Exactly. Mom thinks Serenity might be responding to increased human activity in her territory. But why bring the cubs closer to humans rather than deeper into the protected area? It doesn't make sense from a wildlife behavior perspective." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching along the gravel road that connected their remote cabin to the main preserve headquarters. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees in ghostly white before coming to rest on their porch. Dr. Savannah Reed emerged from the driver's side, her once auburn hair now streaked with gray, but her movements still energetic despite being in her early 60s. As the founder and director of the Serenity Project, she had been both mentor and friend to Emma for most of her life. "I see Lily already texted you," Dr. Reed said by way of greeting, climbing the porch steps with the aid of a walking stick. A souvenir from a hiking accident 3 years earlier. "You drove out here at night because of a bear sighting?" Connor asked, already retrieving another mug for their unexpected guest. Dr. Reed's expression was grave as she accepted the tea. "Not just because of the sighting, because of what else our cameras captured 2 hours later." She pulled out her tablet and brought up a video file. The timestamp showed it was from the same camera location but taken after sunset. The night vision footage initially showed an empty clearing, then movement as 2 men in dark clothing entered the frame. They carried what appeared to be tranquilizer rifles and were studying the ground carefully. "Poachers," Connor breathed, leaning forward. "Not your average poachers," Dr. Reed corrected grimly. "Look at their equipment. Those are military-grade night vision goggles and professional tranquilizing equipment. This isn't opportunistic hunting. It's a targeted operation." Emma felt her blood run cold. "They're tracking Serenity specifically." Dr. Reed nodded. "We think so. The Reynolds Corporation has been unusually aggressive about acquiring permits for their expansion. When wildlife presents an obstacle to development projects of this scale, sometimes problems have a way of disappearing." "Are you suggesting they would illegally remove bears from protected land to clear the way for their development?" Connor asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "It wouldn't be the first time a corporation has employed unethical means to overcome environmental protection obstacles," Dr. Reed replied. "But typically they target individual animals that have been identified as problematic, bears that have approached human structures or shown any aggressive behavior. It gives them the pretext of public safety concerns. And with Serenity's history and fame, removing her would create significant public backlash against the preserve," Emma realized, the implications becoming clear. "They could argue that if even our poster child for successful human-bear coexistence is dangerous, perhaps the entire buffer zone concept needs to be reconsidered." Connor set his mug down firmly. "We need to warn your mother. If the Reynolds Corporation is really behind this—" "Mom already knows," Emma interrupted, showing them the second text message that had just arrived. She's called an emergency meeting at headquarters tomorrow morning with the state wildlife officials and the preserve's legal team. Dr. Reed's expression remained troubled. Official channels move slowly, and we have no concrete proof of Reynolds' involvement yet, just suspicious timing and circumstantial evidence. Meanwhile, those men in the woods are moving right now, tonight. The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Emma looked toward the children's bedroom window, then back to the dark forest where, somewhere, Serenity might be in danger. The choice between her responsibility to her family and her connection to the bear that had shaped her life loomed large. "I'll stay with the kids," Connor said quietly, reading her thoughts. "You know these woods better than anyone, and you know Serenity. If anyone can find her before they do, it's you." Emma's gaze met Dr. Reed's. "The tracking collar we placed on her daughter 2 seasons ago, is it still transmitting?" Dr. Reed pulled up another screen on her tablet. "Intermittently. Last signal was about 3 miles north of the camera location, moving east along the river." Emma was already moving toward the cabin to change into suitable clothing for a night in the forest. 20 minutes later, equipped with tracking equipment, emergency supplies, and her own tranquilizer gun, a precaution she hoped wouldn't be necessary, she stood at the edge of the forest with Dr. Reed, who would monitor communications from the cabin. "Emma," Dr. Reed said seriously, "remember that these men are potentially dangerous. Your priority is to document their activities and alert the authorities. Do not confront them directly." Emma nodded, though something deep within her knew that, if forced to choose between her own safety and Serenity's, the decision might not be so straightforward. The bear had once shown mercy to a helpless child. That debt had never felt fully repaid. The forest at night was a different world, a symphony of sounds and scents that most humans never learned to interpret. But Emma had spent her life in these woods, studying its inhabitants and learning their ways. She moved quietly along game trails, following the intermittent signal from the tracking collar while remaining vigilant for any sign of human intrusion. 2 hours into her search, as she approached the river that cut through the heart of the preserve, Emma detected movement ahead. Instinctively, she extinguished her small flashlight and crouched low in the underbrush. The moon provided just enough illumination to make out the massive silhouette of a bear moving cautiously along the riverbank, followed by smaller shapes. A family group. Emma's heart leapt. She had found them. But almost immediately, she registered another presence, the unmistakable outline of a human figure on the opposite bank. The faint red dot of a laser sight visible even in the dim light. Without conscious thought, Emma produced the small wooden whistle she had carried since childhood. A gift from Dr. Reed that produced a sound remarkably similar to a specific bear vocalization, one that indicated danger to other bears. She blew 3 short bursts, the sound barely audible to human ears, but carrying clearly to ursine ones. The effect was immediate. The lead bear, Serenity's daughter, Emma presumed, froze, then herded her cubs quickly toward a dense thicket. But the largest bear, who had been bringing up the rear, turned in Emma's direction, her posture alert but not alarmed. Even after 20 years, even in the dim moonlight, Emma recognized Serenity. The old bear stood perfectly still, scenting the air, her massive head turning from Emma's hiding place to the human threat across the river. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, bear and woman locked eyes across the distance, a reconnection that defied rational explanation. Then Serenity did something unexpected. Rather than following her daughter and grand cubs into the safety of the thicket, she deliberately moved toward Emma's position, her movements unhurried but purposeful. At the same time, the red dot of the laser sight began tracking her movement. Emma made a split-second decision. Breaking cover, she stepped into the open, placing herself between Serenity and the unseen hunter. "Stop!" she called out, her voice echoing across the river. "This is Dr. Emma Morgan Harrison of the Serenity Project. These bears are on protected land and under study. Identify yourself immediately." The laser sight disappeared instantly. Across the river, Emma could make out hurried movement as the figure retreated into the trees. Using her satellite phone, she quickly reported the encounter to Dr. Reed, who promised to alert the preserve's security team. When Emma turned back, Serenity stood less than 10 feet away, her enormous presence both intimidating and oddly comforting. Up close, the bear's age was evident. Gray hairs sprinkled her muzzle, and her movements, while still powerful, lacked the fluid grace of her younger years. Yet her eyes remained bright with intelligence as they studied Emma's face. "Hello, old friend," Emma whispered, remaining perfectly still. "I see you've got grandchildren now." Serenity made a soft huffing sound, then turned her head toward the river and back, as if indicating the direction the hunter had fled. Emma was struck once again by the uncanny sense that the bear understood far more than conventional science would credit. "I know," Emma said. "We're trying to stop them, but you need to take your family deeper into the preserve, away from the boundaries." As if in response, Serenity turned and walked a few paces toward the north, then looked back at Emma expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" Emma asked incredulously. Despite her lifetime of bear behavior studies, this direct form of communication was unprecedented in her experience, except, of course, for her childhood encounter with this very bear. Cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance, Emma followed as Serenity led her along the riverbank for nearly half a mile, before turning inland toward a steep, rocky hillside. The old bear moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure Emma was still following but never showing any sign of aggression or unease at being trailed by a human. At the base of the hill, Serenity stopped before what appeared to be a small opening in the rocks, a cave entrance partially obscured by vegetation. The bear looked at Emma, then at the cave, then back again with unmistakable intent. Emma hesitated. Following a wild bear was one thing. Entering a potential den site was quite another, violating every safety protocol she had ever taught or practiced. And yet, this was Serenity, the bear who had once allowed a baby to touch her through the bars of a cage, who had recognized that same child years later and accepted her help in finding a new home. Drawing a deep breath and switching on her flashlight, Emma cautiously approached the cave entrance. "I trust you," she murmured to the bear, who had stepped aside to allow her access. "I hope that's not a mistake." The cave opening widened after a narrow entrance passage, revealing a surprisingly spacious interior. Emma's flashlight beam played across the walls, illuminating what at first appeared to be natural striations in the rock. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized with a shock that they were markings, deliberate, man-made markings. Approaching the wall, Emma ran her fingers over the grooves. They were survey markers, relatively recent, with small drill holes indicating where core samples had been taken. In her years of environmental work, she had seen similar markings at mineral exploration sites. "Someone's been surveying inside the preserve boundaries," she whispered, the implications dawning on her. "That's illegal without permits and notification." A soft sound behind her reminded Emma that she was not alone. Serenity stood at the cave entrance, her massive silhouette blocking most of the moonlight. For a fleeting moment, Emma felt a prickle of primal fear. She was alone in a cave with a 500-pound apex predator. Then Serenity moved forward into the beam of the flashlight, and Emma noticed something that drove all thoughts of fear from her mind. On the bear's right flank was a wound. Not life-threatening, but definitely recent. A long, clean slice that could only have been made by a sharp blade. Someone had injured Serenity, likely during a previous encounter with the mysterious figures tracking the bears. "They hurt you," Emma breathed, instinctively stepping closer before catching herself. No matter their history, approaching an injured wild animal was dangerous. But Serenity merely stood still, allowing Emma to examine the wound from a safe distance. Using her satellite phone, Emma took photographs of both the injury and the survey markers, sending them immediately to Dr. Reed along with her location coordinates and a brief explanation. Then she turned back to Serenity. "I need to get this information to people who can help," she explained, feeling simultaneously foolish and completely natural speaking to the bear as if she were another person. "But I promise we'll protect your family. We won't let them take your home again." Serenity made that same soft huffing sound, then turned and padded out of the cave. Emma followed, emerging into the moonlight to find that the old bear had already moved several yards away and was looking back expectantly, clearly intending to lead her somewhere else. For the next hour, Serenity guided Emma through the preserve, showing her 6 more locations where illegal survey markers had been placed and core samples extracted. At each site, Emma documented the evidence meticulously, building a case of systematic unauthorized exploration throughout the eastern section of the preserve, precisely the area that the Reynolds Corporation had been pressuring regulators to open for development. As they approached the final location, a small clearing near a natural spring, Emma heard voices. Signaling Serenity to stay back, and marveling yet again when the wild bear actually complied, she crept forward until she could make out 2 figures setting up what appeared to be drilling equipment beneath portable lights. "The old man wants samples from all 8 sites by morning," one man was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Reynolds is meeting with the commissioner tomorrow afternoon, and he wants proof that the ore body extends this far east." "Still don't see why we're doing this at night," the second man grumbled. "Not like anybody patrols out here." After what happened with the team that went after the bears, Reynolds isn't taking chances. The less evidence of our presence, the better. Emma carefully positioned herself to capture video of the operation using her phone. The mention of the team that went after the bears confirmed her worst suspicions. The Reynolds Corporation was indeed behind the poaching attempt as well as the illegal mineral exploration. She was so focused on documenting the conversation that she didn't notice the third man until his voice came from directly behind her. Well, what do we have here?" Emma spun to find herself facing a tall, broad-shouldered man with a rifle aimed squarely at her chest. His face was partially obscured by night vision goggles, but his posture radiated dangerous confidence. "Dr. Morgan Harrison," he said, recognizing her. "The bear whisperer herself. Mr. Reynolds will be interested to know you're wandering around the woods at night." Emma's mind raced through her options. The satellite phone in her pocket had already transmitted the evidence she'd gathered. Running was pointless. The man clearly knew these woods well enough to track her. Fighting was out of the question against an armed opponent. "The authorities already know about your illegal operations," she said, striving to keep her voice steady. "I've been transmitting evidence all night. You can't hide what Reynolds is doing here." The man's mouth twisted in a cruel smile. "Evidence that might unfortunately be lost when a renowned wildlife researcher has a tragic accident in the woods she loved. Bears can be so unpredictable, after all." Emma's blood ran cold as she realized his intent. The man gestured with his rifle toward the clearing where his colleagues worked. "Move, now." She had taken only 2 steps when a thunderous roar shattered the night silence. The man's expression transformed from smug confidence to primal terror as a massive shape erupted from the underbrush behind Emma. Serenity, rising to her full height, her roar a declaration of protective fury that seemed to shake the very ground. The man fired wildly, the shot going high as he stumbled backward. Serenity charged past Emma, closing the distance to the threat with shocking speed for an aging bear. The man turned to flee but tripped on an exposed root, his rifle flying from his hands as he fell. Serenity loomed over him, her jaws less than a foot from his face, saliva dripping onto his cheek as he lay paralyzed with fear. Emma rushed forward, positioning herself in the bear's line of sight. "Serenity, no," she called firmly. "He's not worth it." For a heart-stopping moment, Emma wasn't certain the bear would heed her. Serenity's muscles were tensed for the killing strike, her breath coming in hot, aggressive pants. Then, slowly, the great bear's posture relaxed. With deliberate contempt, she turned away from the cowering man, returning to Emma's side with the dignified bearing of a creature who had chosen mercy not from weakness, but from strength. The commotion had alerted the other workers, who now stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, tools abandoned as they stared in disbelief at the massive bear, standing calmly beside a human woman as if they were longtime companions. "Your employer is breaking multiple federal laws," Emma called to them, her confidence bolstered by Serenity's protective presence. "When the authorities arrive, and they will be here soon, you'll want to be able to tell them you were cooperative." As if on cue, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The preserve's rapid response team, alerted by Dr. Reed based on Emma's transmissions, was en route. The workers looked at each other, then at their fallen colleague, and finally at the imposing bear that watched them with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess their very souls. One by one, they raised their hands in surrender. Dawn was breaking by the time the situation had been secured. The illegal operators were in custody, their equipment confiscated as evidence. Emma had given her preliminary statement to the preserve's head of security, with a more detailed debriefing scheduled later that day after she'd had some rest. As the last of the response team departed, Emma found herself alone once more with Serenity at the edge of the clearing. In the golden light of early morning, the bear looked somehow both more wild and more familiar, a creature of the forest who had nonetheless forged an impossible bond with a human child 2 decades earlier. "I think we're even now," Emma said softly. "You saved me today, just like I helped save you all those years ago." Serenity regarded her with those knowing eyes, then turned her great head toward the east, where the sun was climbing above the mountains. With a soft, chuffing sound that Emma had come to recognize as a form of greeting or farewell, the bear began moving away from the clearing, toward the deeper forest where her daughter and grandcubs awaited. Emma watched her go, a lump forming in her throat. Something told her this might be the last time she would see Serenity. The old bear had accomplished her mission, showing Emma the human threat to her territory and family. Now she would return to the wild existence she was meant to have, perhaps living out her final years in the peace she deserved. "Goodbye, old friend," Emma whispered as the bear's form disappeared among the trees. "Thank you for everything." 3 months later, Emma stood before a packed auditorium at the National Conservation Summit, the evidence she had gathered that night projected on enormous screens behind her. The Reynolds Corporation's illegal activities had sparked a federal investigation that had uncovered a web of corruption extending into the state's regulatory agencies. The corporation's CEO faced criminal charges, and the preserve's boundaries had been not just protected, but expanded, with new legislation creating enhanced penalties for wildlife crimes in protected areas. Emma concluded her presentation, The Serenity project began with a moment of connection between species that defied conventional understanding. A baby reached out to a captive bear, and something profound was exchanged between them, something that continued to resonate across decades, ultimately leading to the protection of an entire ecosystem. She clicked to the final slide, a clear wildlife camera image captured just 1 week earlier. It showed Serenity and her daughter lying peacefully beside the river, 3 cubs playing under their watchful eyes. The old bear was looking directly at the camera, her expression serene and somehow knowing, as if she understood that her legacy was now secure. Science cannot fully explain the bond that formed between myself and this remarkable animal, Emma acknowledged. But perhaps some connections transcend our need to explain them. Perhaps they simply ask us to honor them, and to recognize that in the web of life that sustains us all, every strand is precious. Every relationship has meaning, and every creature, from the smallest insect to the mightiest bear, has a right to exist on its own terms. The applause was thunderous, but Emma barely heard it. In her mind, she was back in that forest clearing at dawn, watching Serenity disappear into the wilderness where she belonged. A wild creature who had, for a brief time, built a bridge between worlds that most believed could never connect. And in a remote corner of the preserve, beneath ancient trees that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns, Serenity dozed beside the river, her grand cubs tumbling nearby under the watchful eye of their mother. In her dreams, perhaps she remembered a tiny hand reaching fearlessly through the bars of a cage, offering not fear, but innocent wonder. Perhaps she remembered the child who had grown into the woman who helped secure her family's future. Or perhaps she simply rested, content in the knowledge that her domain remained wild and free, protected by those who had learned to see bears not as threats to be conquered, but as fellow travelers on the journey of life, different in form but alike in their fundamental right to exist in peace. 10 years passed. The Serenity Wildlife Preserve had doubled in size, its protection strengthened by legislation that had become a model for conservation efforts nationwide. Emma's work had expanded beyond bears to study interspecies communication across mammals, earning her international recognition and numerous scientific awards. Her twins, now 15, had inherited their mother's passion for wildlife, though in different ways. Lily through scientific observation, Jacob through photography like his father. On a crisp autumn morning, reminiscent of that day long ago when a baby had first encountered a caged bear, Emma received the call she had been both expecting and dreading for years. One of the preserve rangers had found Serenity in a sun-dappled clearing near the river that had been her favorite resting place. The old bear had passed peacefully in her sleep, having lived far beyond the typical lifespan of her species. 32 remarkable years that had transformed not just her own destiny, but the fate of an entire ecosystem. "Would you like us to bring her in for examination?" the ranger asked gently, knowing the unique bond Emma had shared with this particular bear. "No," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. "She lived wild. She should remain so in death. Just send me the coordinates." That afternoon, Emma and her family made the journey to the clearing where Serenity lay. The preserve staff had respectfully withdrawn, leaving the site undisturbed. The great bear looked peaceful in repose, her massive form still imposing even in death, her silver-flecked muzzle serene as if in sleep. Emma knelt beside the bear that had shaped the course of her life, placing a gentle hand on the thick fur that had once seemed so frightening and now felt as familiar as an old friend's embrace. "Rest well, old friend," she whispered. "Your legacy will continue." As if summoned by some silent call, shapes began to emerge from the surrounding forest. Bears of various ages and sizes, moving with deliberate grace into the clearing. Emma and her family stepped back, watching in awe as one by one the bears approached Serenity's form. Each paused briefly beside the fallen matriarch, some touching her with a gentle paw, others simply standing in silent vigil before retreating to the edge of the clearing. "It's her family," Connor whispered, his camera forgotten in his hands. "Her children, her grandchildren. They're saying goodbye," Jacob murmured, his young face solemn with understanding. Last to arrive was a massive female bear, unmistakably Serenity's daughter, now a matriarch in her own right. She approached her mother's body and sat beside it, raising her head to release a low, mournful sound that seemed to resonate through the trees, through the ground, through the very air itself. One by one, the other bears joined the lament, their voices blending in a chorus that defied scientific explanation but touched something primal and true in the human witnesses. Emma felt tears streaming down her face, unashamed of this grief that transcended the boundaries between species. Lily and Jacob moved to stand on either side of her, their hands finding hers in silent support. Connor stood behind them, his arm encircling Emma's shoulders, bearing witness to a moment few humans would ever be privileged to see, the mourning rituals of wild bears, shared with the human family that had earned a place in their trust. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays through the trees, the bear family began to depart, melting back into the forest in twos and threes until only Serenity's daughter remained. The younger matriarch approached Emma with slow, deliberate steps, stopping just a few feet away. For a long moment, bear and human regarded each other, a current of understanding passing between them that needed no words. Then, in a gesture that echoed across decades to that first miraculous encounter, the bear extended her massive paw and placed it gently on the ground before Emma, holding it there for a heartbeat before turning and disappearing into the gathering dusk. Emma knew what she had to do. In the weeks that followed, she worked with preserve officials, conservation experts, and indigenous representatives to establish the Serenity Memorial. Not a physical monument that would intrude upon the wilderness, but a living legacy in the form of a comprehensive protection plan for bear migration corridors that spanned 3 states. The plan would ensure that bears could travel safely between protected areas, maintaining genetic diversity and adapting to changing climate conditions for generations to come. On the day the protection agreement was signed, Emma stood at the edge of the clearing where Serenity had taken her final rest. The bear's body had been reclaimed by the forest, as was right and natural. But her spirit seemed to linger in the dappled sunlight, in the wind that rustled through the autumn leaves, in the paw prints of her descendants that marked the soft earth. "You changed everything," Emma said softly to the quiet clearing. "Not just for me, but for all of us. You showed us what's possible when we look beyond fear to connection." As if in answer, a butterfly, brilliant blue and utterly unseasonable for the late autumn day, fluttered from a nearby branch to land briefly on Emma's outstretched hand. Its wings opened and closed once, twice, 3 times, before it spiraled upward into a shaft of sunlight and vanished. That night, in a dream more vivid than any she had experienced before, Emma found herself once again a child, standing before a rusty cage in the middle of a country road. Inside, Serenity watched her with those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to hold knowledge beyond animal understanding. But this time, as Emma reached through the bars, the cage dissolved into mist, and they stood together in a sun-dappled forest clearing. "Thank you," the bear said, her voice not in words but in feelings that translated themselves in Emma's dreaming mind. "For seeing me, for helping my children, for remembering." "I will always remember," Emma promised, her dream self both child and woman simultaneously. As long as there are bears in these mountains, you will be remembered. Serenity's form began to shift, becoming at once less solid and more luminous, her essence merging with the forest around them until Emma could no longer distinguish where bear ended and wilderness began. Not just remembered, came the final whispered understanding. Continued. Emma awoke with tears on her face and a profound sense of peace in her heart. Outside her window, the first light of dawn illuminated the mountains that sheltered Serenity's descendants. Bears who would never know captivity, never know cruelty, never know the fear of extinction that had threatened so many species before. Humans learned to see them as fellow beings worthy of protection rather than obstacles to be removed. In the years that followed, Emma watched her own children grow into remarkable adults who carried forward the work she had begun. Lily became a wildlife veterinarian, specializing in rehabilitation techniques that minimized human imprinting on orphaned bear cubs. Jacob's photography and documentary work brought the beauty and complexity of bear societies to millions of viewers worldwide, changing perceptions one image at a time. On Emma's 60th birthday, her children surprised her with the announcement that the International Bear Research Center they had established would be officially named the Serenity Institute for Interspecies Understanding. Its mission statement, engraved on a simple stone at the entrance, read, "For the bear who taught us that boundaries exist only in our minds, and that the greatest wisdom comes from seeing beyond fear to the connections that unite all living beings." As Emma traced the words with weathered fingers, she felt again that sense of connection that had begun 7 decades earlier when a baby had fearlessly reached out to a caged bear. The circle was complete, the legacy secured. Somewhere in the protected wilderness, Serenity's great-great-grandcubs were taking their first steps into a world made safer by an unlikely friendship between species. And in that moment, Emma understood the final truth of their extraordinary bond, that some connections transcend death, transcend species, transcend time itself. That in the web of life that unites all beings, a single act of compassion can ripple outward across generations, changing the world in ways that can never be fully measured but will forever be felt. In the end, it was never really about a baby and a bear at all. It was about the recognition that had passed between them, the simple, profound understanding that beneath our different skins, we are all seeking the same things: safety, freedom, the right to exist on our own terms, and the grace of being truly seen by another living soul. That understanding, born in a moment of innocent connection on a country road, had grown into a movement that transformed humanity's relationship with the wild world. And as long as bears roamed the mountains and children gazed in wonder at the natural world, the spirit of serenity would continue, not just as a memory, but as a living promise of what becomes possible when we reach fearlessly across the boundaries that separate us and discover that they were never really there at all.